Good morning. Thank you all again for being here. We're really glad that you've come to our session. I'm simply going to tell you a wee bit about each of the speakers, and we'll get on with our session. Terry Myers-Zawacki is Emerita Professor of English at George Mason University. She's also the editor of the International Exchanges on the Study of Writing series. I am Emerita Professor of English from the University of Missouri, where I directed our WAC program for 15 years. Terry and I were both privileged to do WAC-related work in mainland China and in Hong Kong, and we bring that background to our discussion this morning. Dr. Julia Chen is the director of the Educational Development Center at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, and Dr. Jose Lai is the director of the English Language Teaching Unit at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Dr. Chen and Dr. Lai, along with numerous others, have collaborated in mounting 3 highly successful English across the curriculum conferences. The first 2 in 2016 and 2018, which Dr. Chen and colleagues have hosted at Hong Kong Polytechnic University, and in 2021 via Zoom. Please read more about these 2 scholars on the conference website. The goal of our panel is to introduce to US audiences the English Across the Curriculum initiative within Hong Kong's higher education context, and further to suggest that the trilingual Hong Kong context offers writing study scholars a rich opportunity to study translanguaging practices across the disciplines and borders. We have structured the panel to allow time for question and answers at the end of the presentations. Next slide, please. This is simply an illustration of some wonderful collaboration that's already gone on between China scholars and US scholars. Wu Dan at Xi'an International Studies University did her PhD at Clemson in WAC, and her work produced the book that you're seeing pictured here. Terry and I, again, were both privileged to be informants on Wu Dan's work. Next slide, please. We early on tried to help with the establishment of a Chinese network on writing across the curriculum. The forum would have enabled discussion about key issues in teaching and research on WAC in China and more. Unfortunately, that initiative was not sustainable. The differences between the US and Chinese academic and institutional cultures, rhetorical traditions, and disciplinary homes for pedagogical research proved to be just too complicated for this initiative to keep going. But what you're going to hear about today are some continuations, not of the network on WAC, but on a new take on WAC that is proving to be very successful in Hong Kong. And I'm happy now to pass along the conversation to Dr. Julia Chen. I'm sorry. No, it's not Julia.
Terry.
It's Terry. It's Terry Zawacki
Terry.
going first with the Chinese word.
Yes. So I'll start with jiagui, which Julia would have been. Julia, would you pronounce that for me?
You did it perfectly.
All right.
You did it perfectly.
I want this slide to set the tone for our panel. That is that we in US WAC have much to gain from connecting our scholarly paths with other countries, and particularly with Hong Kong and their vibrant EAC initiative. Next slide. Those connections began for me when I first met Julia at the 2014 IWAC conference. Since I'd recently traveled in China, as Marty mentioned, I was interested to hear what WAC-like efforts colleagues were working on in Hong Kong. The session description drew me in, and I stayed after the session to ask Julia and Esther questions. That conversation led to an email dialogue between me and Julia about WAC programs that she might visit in the US to inform the initiatives she and her cross-institutional colleagues, including Jose Lai, were developing. In her remarks, Julia will say more about her US gathering efforts, as will Jose, who has also visited US writing programs. I first met Jose in 2015 when I was a plenary speaker at the first EAC conference. And the following year, she invited me to her institution, the Chinese University of Hong Kong, to speak and consult on EAC projects there, including the peer tutoring initiative, which she'll describe. Next slide. The EAC conferences and my work with these two colleagues confirmed a foundational premise of writing across the curriculum, that WAC programs and practices are always local, adapted to the needs and demands of the institution, always responsive, in other words, to what linguist Michael Halliday termed the context of culture and the context of situation. These terms have been picked up by scholars in other literacy contexts and used, for example, as you see here, by Hong Kong researchers Chen and Zhang to describe teaching writing in Chinese-speaking contexts. In their introduction to their book, Chen and Zhang explained that the context of culture and the context of situation must determine the shape of a writing curriculum and its implementation, a point not unlike the always local US WAC principle. So while EAC would be influenced by US WAC theory and practice, the Committee of Cross-Institutional Colleagues involved in building the initiative understood that to be successful, it had to adapt to their local context. From the outset then, English language and learning through both writing and speaking was a crucial local dimension. Next slide. It's understandable then that EAC would also draw from European CLIL, content language integrated learning, perhaps most well known for its practice in secondary schools and English foreign language contexts, and typically unfamiliar to US WAC practitioners. While WAC and CLIL and other language integrated initiatives have similar goals for using writing to learn, there are some important distinctions in their disciplinary homes and in the theories and research that inform the pedagogy of each, as you see on this slide, which I'll give you a little bit of time to read. And next slide. Next slide, Grace. Although researchers and practitioners in these two traditions may be asking different questions and drawing on different scholarship, both are concerned with writing as a means of learning, both to know and to show, as James Moffat succinctly put it, and as a means of learning language, writing to learn language across the curriculum, a focus of Rosa Manchin's scholarship, for example, in the collection, including the collection Writing and Language Learning, the 2020 collection. As Alan Hervella points out in this slide, in the process of writing to acquire information and understanding, second language acquisition also occurs. And Hervella has a chapter in the Manchin book I just mentioned. Next slide. Next slide. As a speaking, writing, WAC, CLIL adaptation, EAC has thus far proven to be remarkably resilient from its launch at the inaugural 2015 conference, its growing international presence, evidenced by participation at the 2018 and 2021 conferences, and the growth of cross-institutional, cross-disciplinary innovations, some of which Julia and Jose will describe. On this slide, you see the cover of the peer-reviewed collection featuring invited chapters expanding on sessions at the 2018 EAC conference and recently published by the International Exchanges series on the WAC Clearinghouse. Next slide. Before I conclude my remarks, I want to return briefly to the use of writing to learn language. Many of you here will no doubt be familiar with the phenomenon Chris Casanave notes here, that when L2 students are focused on accuracy at the sentence level, their level of fluency may go down and vice versa. So while we want our L2 students to write fluently, fluency requires a certain familiarity with the syntax and lexicon of English, along with the lexicon of the academic course or field, both of which they are still in the process of acquiring. And for the latter, of course, our English L1 students are also acquiring the academic disciplinary lexicon. Next slide. Which leads me to Suresh Kanagaraja's argument for the value of allowing students to shuttle between or among languages in their writing to help them achieve fluency, while also mapping their first or additional languages onto the genres and styles of the target language. Kanagaraja's argument joins with other transnational language and writing scholars who have been interested for the past several decades in the multiliteracies and multi-competencies that students possess, an additive perspective on English L2 communication practices rather than a focus on deficits. Next slide, please. I'll close with these words from Li Wei, who reminds us that language and content cannot be seen as separate processes. Rather, he says, we are always translanguaging, adapting our bodies and our brains to the language activity that surrounds us. With this awareness, he argues, we can enable and empower our students by engaging them in conscious and purposeful language work as an effective tool for learning. And this, I believe, is what is being enacted in the EAC movement. And I'll turn it over to Julia.
Thank you. Thanks, Terry. So good day to IWAC from Hong Kong. It is now 11:13 p.m. in Hong Kong, and I think it's for some of you is in the morning, some of you is in the afternoon, some of you in the early evening, and some of you at night like us at almost midnight. So I am Julia Chen. I am from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. I am going to talk about the trilingual Hong Kong context, which Terry began to mention, which will then lead to why we are doing English across the curriculum, in short EAC in Hong Kong, and some of our current efforts. Now, so Grace, if you can just click. This is Hong Kong with our beautiful natural harbor. This is also Hong Kong with many small islands, boat rides, and hiking trails. And this is also Hong Kong, one of the most densely populated cities in the world. We have a lot of tall residential buildings that are so packed together you cannot see the sky. And this is an aerial view of a flat. What you see is almost the whole of the living area in this flat. Now, this is not uncommon in our small city that has a population of 7.5 million. Now, I'm going to show you some charts, but don't worry, you don't need to read everything, okay? Please just focus on the words in red. So, for example, in Hong Kong in 2016, there was a government household survey, and it found that 95%, Grace? Yes, 95.7% of Hong Kongers speak Chinese as their mother tongue. This slide that you see in front of you shows 3 charts. Again, just focus on the words in red, okay? The left chart is about the competence in using spoken Cantonese dialect in Hong Kong. The middle chart is about competence in spoken English, and the right-hand chart, competence in written English. I have highlighted 2 percentages for each of the charts. The first percentage shows the self-ratings of the economically active, whereas the second percentage for each chart shows the self-ratings of students. You can see that the 2 figures on the left chart on Cantonese competence stand at 87%, which is much higher than the percentages in the middle and the right-hand charts, which hover around 25 to 29% for competence in spoken English and written English. The next slide shows 2 charts about the frequency of using Cantonese on the left-hand side versus spoken English on the right-hand side. Without going into detail, you can see that the percentages on the left side for Cantonese are around 90%, whereas those on the right side for spoken English are at single digits, from 3.8 to 7%. So we see a vast difference between the frequency of speaking in Cantonese versus speaking in English. Now, just 2 more charts. Next slide, please. This time, these 2 charts compare the frequency of using spoken English at work versus written English at work in Hong Kong. You'll see that the percentage on the right-hand side, that is the frequency of using written English, is considerably higher than those percentages on the left side, which tells us that of the 2, we should probably prepare our students more on their writing abilities. Okay, so I'm next going to talk about 2 policy changes in Hong Kong. So in the last 24 years, there have been 2 major education-related policy changes in Hong Kong. Now, as many people know, Hong Kong was returned from British rule to Chinese rule in 1997. A year later, in September 1998, the government introduced a new medium of instruction policy. And 3/4 of English medium secondary schools switched to Chinese medium teaching in forms 1 to 3, something like grades 7 to 9 in the US. And only a small percentage of schools remained EMI, that is, English as the medium of instruction and for classroom interaction. If you're interested, you can read up Evans if you're interested in this part of the history of Hong Kong. Now, anyway, the second policy change happened in 2012, when Hong Kong went from a 5 + 2 years British-like secondary system to a 6-year secondary school system, which is similar to the US grades 7 to 12. The secondary school exit exam, or sometimes called the university entrance exam, also changed from 2 public exams previously under British rule to 1 public exam only after Form 6 or after grade 12. Now, this picture in the middle of the slide shows how a public exam hall looks like in Hong Kong. How does this policy change work for university education? First, as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, universities went from a 3-year to a 4-year university curriculum. Students come in 1 year younger, 1 year less training in English before entering university. Most universities in Hong Kong have 2 full semesters and a shorter summer term, and almost all subjects are done in English, except for Chinese subjects and for 1 university out of 8 universities. And my co-presenter, Jose Lai, will tell you more about that because that is her university. So in my university, for example, can we have more English courses now that there are 4 years instead of 3 years in the undergraduate curriculum? The answer is not really. We will have to compete very hard for curriculum space. So what happens in my university? In my university, the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, English is the medium of instruction. Students do their assessments and exams in English. Students can enter our university at 2 levels. Those who come in to do a degree, their English is generally fairly weak. Many of them barely passed English in the public exam. And for those who cannot get into a 4-year program, but only a 2-year program, something like a junior college program, some of them even failed the English public exam at entry. Their English at university exit is better, but unfortunately not by a lot. And our employers' feedback say that our graduates are weak at English. So we still have a long way to go. Now, other problems that we have observed a concern, for example, what you see here, the limited English focus in the curriculum. Students generally take 2 or 3 compulsory English courses only, 13 weeks per course, around 2 to 3 hours per week. But when the English courses, when the English courses will be, for example, which year or which semester and what the course will focus on, the departments have a say. So for example, one of our engineering departments did not want any English course in year 1. They want all English courses to start and finish in year 2. So it can sometimes be difficult for the English Language Center to decide when to run academic English subjects that can offer the most English, the most needed language support to students at the most opportune time. Anyway, an opportunity came. The Hong Kong University Grants Committee, which holds the purse strings of the universities, set up a community of practice seed fund in 2013. And my vice president asked me to lead a community practice on English that is not already covered in existing English courses. Bingo! I took that opportunity to do English across the curriculum. So you may ask, why English across the curriculum? Next slide, please. First, there were 2 previous WAC initiatives in Hong Kong, one of which my co-presenter, Jose, will talk about. Those 2 previous WAC initiatives did not continue, okay? That was a great pity. Now, secondly, I read WAC literature. So thank you very much, WAC Clearinghouse, WAC Scholars, for sharing your experiences and your scholarship. And I thought we could try something like WAC and focus on both writing and speaking in English, hence English across the curriculum. To learn more about WAC, I attended IWAC 2014, which was what Terry said just now. And there I met Terry and Marty. I learned from them and many others. And I decided that indeed WAC is worth doing. I just need to keep learning, thinking, and planning. So later that year, I applied for and received an overseas scholarship from my university to visit 5 universities in the States. First stop, George Mason, and then George Washington American University, and then University of Missouri in Columbia, and Stanford University. I met WAC teachers and faculty, sat in on WAC brown bag professional development sessions, sat in on some lessons by faculty who were involved in the WAC program. And I also went to the next 2 IWACs and to this one. So back in Hong Kong, I then asked myself, and worked out with colleagues in my own university, such as Dr. Grace Lin, who is with us now, what versions of WAC would suit our context, would suit our culture, and would suit our situation. Like what Terry said just now, how can we 接轨 with WAC? Right? And at the same time, address the language learning and academic literacy needs in our educational system. Who could we partner with in our university and maybe in other universities as well? How can we find money to do EAC? As EAC is not in the mainstream, there is no time off for teachers to do EAC. We do not have, or most of our universities do not have TAs or graduate TAs. But anyway, we dug our heels in and we tried. So despite difficulties, we went from starting with my university only to involving multiple universities, and from one small community of practice seed fund to at least 13 funded projects now that involve many department staff and students. Without these fundings, we couldn't have gone on. So that is the situation in Hong Kong. But this doesn't mean that we can now be complacent. Not at all. If anything, I would say that EAC is still in danger. There can be policy changes anytime. Funds can dry up. The funding procedures can change. The processes are competitive. People can come and go, and funding is not guaranteed. Anyway, I said just now that I learned from WAC the importance of getting faculty buy-in via those brown bag lunch sessions. So we spent quite a bit of time and energy on this too. We have run numerous workshops and for teaching staff, first of all, on improving their own English for their own needs, such as for their own publication and their teaching. And in turn, we hope that they can help their students with their students' English needs. One thing we have done is we have also tried to revise some of their assessment rubrics. with the faculty themselves so that they would include communication or some sort of language use in their assessment criteria. In Hong Kong, students are very pragmatic. If you include something in assessment criteria, they will pay more attention to that. So we discussed with faculty their students' language needs and designed additional resources, which we sometimes call tips, to help their students do better in their writing and speaking assessment. In this way, faculty found it less frustrating to grade assessments, which leads to a win-win situation for both faculty and their students. Next slide. We also realized that we should try to expand, yes, and sustain English across the curriculum. To do so strategically, we need to establish a profile for EAC to make it less easy for our university to cut us. So, like what Terry said just now, we decided to do an international conference. And from one, we've now done 3 conferences. The first one in 2015, 2018, and recently in May 2021, just 2.5 months ago. Via the EAC conferences, we want to tell the world that Hong Kong is doing EAC again. We want to learn from the experienced, and we want to learn from the experiences around the world. And on this point, I must point out that I would especially like to thank WAC mentors and scholars, including Terry, Marty, Mike Palmquist, Chris Ensign, Karen Kessler, Paul Rogers, Anna Habib, Rebecca Burnett, Jay Jordan, Melissa Myers, and many others. I must have left out names, but I thank everyone for coming to our conferences, delivering plenary addresses, offering workshops, and sharing your scholarship with us. With the EAC conferences, we also want to spread the word about WAC and EAC and content and language integrated learning to other parts of the world. There are many teachers in Asia, for example, who previously had not heard about this field. We want to connect, like what I wrote here, connect and motivate and encourage each other on the WAC and EAC road. And we want to develop EAC scholarship. We are very glad to say that the EAC conference we had this May had over 1,000 registrants from 48 countries on 6 continents around the world. And you can see the names of the countries and the breakdown here. And we thank everyone who helped us to promote the EAC conferences. So we have slowly and gradually started engaging in some scholarly work. Terry showed something just now. Grace, maybe the next slide. Yeah, so Terry showed this as well. And now we have had some publications by language teachers alone, or some co-authored with faculty. And I'm very glad to repeat what Terry already mentioned just now, that an edited volume of papers which expand on some of the presentations given at the second EAC conference in 2018 has been published. Thank you very much, WAC Clearinghouse, for publishing the volume. And huge thanks to the series editors, Terry and Joan Mullen, and Mike Palmquist as well, for their advice, comments, and help throughout the whole process. We couldn't have done it without you. Now, Grace, next slide. There are 2 more panels about EAC in this week's IWAC. Here are their session numbers, their titles, and their times. Please join us if you can. I'll now pass the time to Jose to talk about how she has been doing EAC in her university. Jose, please.
Thank you very much, Julia, for providing such a comprehensive context, the Hong Kong setting at large. Now, in my sharing, I would focus on what has happened, at my own university, the Chinese University of Hong Kong, CUHK for short. Specifically, I would like to describe the urgent needs and the development of the EAC project and its extended project year tutoring scheme that Terry has mentioned earlier, in her introduction. Now, a little bit more about our university. CUHK was established in 1963. And it is the only university in Hong Kong that adopts a bilingual language policy, with both English and Chinese being official languages. As you can see here, in our school vision, the bilingual and multilingual dimensions, of student education are highlighted. Now, our university is a comprehensive research university, so we have 8 faculties. And then we have an enrollment figure of over 20,000 students per year, postgrad and undergrad together. And with all the staff, we have around 30,000 people on campus, which is quite a scene, right? Here, we might think that, well, why is there a need for EAC? Well, you have already listened to Julia, and you've got some of the background information, which I'm not going to repeat. Now, to answer this question, in our context, we should revisit the notion of bilingual language policy that is adopted as UHK. It means that students are free to choose whichever language they want to operate in unless it is specified by the faculty. For example, within the same course, students may hand in their written assignments either in English or in Chinese. Now, since English is used as a second or even foreign language for some of our students, it is not difficult to imagine and understand that students do have a strong preference for Chinese. So it has been our real challenge to help our university achieve the goal of making the graduates globally competitive and be able to use it as an international language. Well, perhaps it's not too exaggerating to say that it is an uphill battle for us, the English language educators. And here at this point, I'd like to register my particular thanks to my colleagues who work here at the ARTU, because of this bilingual setting. Yeah, I think it is, we take pride in this, but at the same time, we have a more complicated linguistic environment to deal with. Now, to fight this battle, next, please. The English language teaching unit is entrusted by the university to provide a formal curriculum to all undergraduates. So our unit's mission statement, as you can see later, shows to all undergraduates that this formal curriculum is really important for them. Now, can I go back to the vision statement, the mission statement, Grace? Thank you. Yeah. The fourth bullet point, all right, the highlighted one about seeking out opportunities to work with departments and faculties across the university allows us to develop and design ESP courses, English for Specific Purposes courses, and EAC interventions for specific faculties and programs. Now, the next slide now will depict the structure of the compulsory program designated for graduation. Now, if you have a look at this slide, you can see that there's a progression of our courses that forms the curriculum from EAP, from year 1 to ESP, English for Specific Purposes, to EPP, English for Professional Purposes. That spans over 3 years. As you can imagine, the ESP courses could only be faculty-based. When we talk about faculty, we're talking about like your college that you talk about, Faculty of Arts, Faculty of Law, right? Can only be faculty-based rather than program-based. Why? For example, within our own faculty, like Faculty of Arts, there are more than 14 departments or programs. Well, how much can we do, for these students? So in other words, the course that we design for this faculty group of students cannot fit all. And therefore, there are opportunities, for EAC interventions to come in to complement the curriculum. Now, Julia mentioned that, that there's this government funding by UGC, the University Grants Committee. Actually, we have received a very generous, funding from UGC as well. So the EAC project was formally launched in 2016 as an institutional movement at CHK. Institutional movement because, we actually reach out to all 8 faculties. We reach out to different programs and set up COP projects, like what, Julia mentioned is a community of practice projects meant to be collaborative. And every time when we reach out to our collaborators, I would make it very clear to them that, okay, we're not here to do things for you, but with you. So, the element, the nature of collaboration is key. So here you can see that, that we have several key aims. We want to explore different academic literacies within each discipline, encourage subject teachers to pay attention to both content and language, because, subject teachers only care about the content. They cannot care about the language, but through this movement, we hope that they can pay attention to both. And of course, at the same time, we hope that we can encourage our content teachers to assume a stronger ownership of language education in our setting, that is ESL, English as a second language. We firmly believe that language enhancement cannot be and shouldn't be the sole responsibility of language educators, in the ESL, EFL setting. So we hope, we can have buy-in here. Next, please. Well, I believe we can't talk about EAC without mentioning WAC. The 结轨 is very important, and we owe a lot, to all these WAC forerunners. Now, while this implementation of EAC at COHK is relatively recent, well, I would say since 2014, even before, the project was formally launched, because, we had this symposium and we had this privilege of collaborating with Julia and other universities, back then because of the COP fund. Now, the practice of WAC can actually date back to around 2004, if I remember correctly, when my former colleague, Dr. George Brain, who started WAC at COHK, and actually he was the first person to start WAC in Hong Kong. And he then brought it over to other two universities, Polytechnic University and City University. Now, it's really, really very interesting to note that, after a decade or so, WAC was revived in the form of EAC. Now, WAC, could not continue because, there was no funding, not because the project was not good. In fact, it was brilliant. It was so good that actually it helped us at CHK to get funding because our PVC remembers, how good the WAC program was. All right. And I think, well, it's so interesting that, this WAC revised in the form of EAC was rekindled at Poly Year, like, Julia was sharing, her stories, with us. And then COHK rejoined the fund in 2014. Life is so interesting, right? So, we're glad that, we have that kind of reunion, after a decade or so. All right, the next slide will show the status quo, what is happening, at CHK now. Now, to date, as you can see, we have worked with more than 40 content teachers from 24 academic departments. We also work with college education and university general education. In fact, in some universities, general ed and language enhancement programs, they're closely related. Now, most COP collaborators request support in helping the students with the writing, particularly, in writing their FYP, the final year project, or, capstone project, whatever you call it, right? And here at our university, those in the engineering and education faculties, they particularly ask for that kind of help. Well, mainly because, the students' English proficiency is not as high, but then, they have to achieve, all right, to a certain extent. Now, others may seek help, with developing a linked course that addresses students' language needs alongside their major courses in a timely manner. For example, law students, linguistic students, they want us to develop, linked courses for them. Now, others, after professional communication training, for example, the School of Architecture, they would like us to help the students with the studio presentations. That is really very pressurizing for the students. Well, I think, you get the picture, that with all these now. Next, please. So in order to really address the diverse needs of different student groups, we have adopted a flexible and evolving model in implementing our interventions at COHK. Well, take, for example, the information engineering. They have a large cohort of over 120 or maybe 100, 200 students. So we can't really give them very, very personalized, kind of help. But then we started off, having intervention workshops for them, helping them with the students with the final year project. But then more recently, we try to move on, to something more sustainable, that is creating some e-learning modules for them. Whereas, the smaller cohort group, ESSC, the Earth System Science students, they have about 30 students, and these students are quite top-notch because they're going to be scientists. So they were not happy just with the workshops. They wanted something more tailored to their needs. So we set up a scheme called the Language Communication Advisors, LCA, so that the language advisors can really work alongside the students, providing individualized feedback on their FYP reports. So it's really very different. Now, as you can see now, our interventions can take different forms of different learning outcomes. Now, if you ask me, what is the key to making good decisions? Actually, it resides, with the interaction and negotiation with our collaborators. So this back and forth collaboration, becomes very, very important. Now, next slide, please. Regardless of the nature of intervention, our team would go through a general cycle featuring 5 stages. Now, the first one is needs analysis. For needs analysis, we try to collect as much course data and student data as possible to position ourselves before we develop materials for teaching and learning. And then to identify the impact of our intervention and to improve our practice, assessment of learning outcomes and project evaluation are built in, our cycle. I'm proud, to say that the satisfaction level of our users is very high. Now, next slide, please. As newbies, we wanted to implement our project more sure-footedly, make sure that we are on the right track, doing the right thing. So we visited different universities in the States in 2016 to learn more about WAC. Now, the visit to the Writing Center of George Mason University was a highlight. It was particularly memorable for an obvious reason. Who can you see? Terry Zawacki. Thank you, right in front in the picture. And you can also see Susan Lawrence in the middle as well. But so thank you very much. As like Julia has said, we really can't thank all these forerunners, they're well enough, and Marty as well. Yeah. Okay. Next, please. Not only have we learned about WAC and Writing Center pedagogy, we have improved on our peer tutoring scheme. Remember, I mentioned that this is actually an extended service, extended program from our EAC. So with insights, that we have gained through the visits, we improve our practice. No time to go into that. If you're interested, please email me. I can talk a little bit more about that. All right. Now, this scheme is an extended service of EAC. Now, operating at the individualized level, whereby the needy students can seek support from trained peer tutors. The peer tutors, we recruited them from different backgrounds through different channels. And on average, if I remember correctly, we have more than 50 peer tutors serving each year now. And they're from more than 15 different countries or regions. Amazing. Now, as for the tutees, we have around 20 of them from all faculties, and they often come back for multiple consultations. Now, let's have a look at the profiles of some of our peer tutors. You can look at their name, the major, and the areas of support. And these are all online video profiles that, like pictures, telling peer tutees, who I am, who they are, and then they try to reach out to potential tutees. And these peer tutors, they are very professional, and I think both Terry and Marty, might be able to testify to that because they visited, our campus, some time ago. Now, the next slide, we show the areas of support requested by peer tutees. Not surprisingly, academic writing often tops the list, followed by oral presentation. Remember what Julia mentioned? She said, look, the frequency of use in writing in English is low, but it's relatively higher, than speaking. So I mean, everything just come together. You can see that, students really need a lot of academic writing support. Now, at the same time, it's worth noting that the turn-up rate for these appointments is over 96%. On some occasions, it's 100%. And the satisfaction level is sky high. I tell you, if our teachers will look at this satisfaction level, they will be green with envy, because very often the score is above 5.6, 5.8, sometimes 6, which is a perfect score out of 6, right, for all items. Just amazing. Now, it seems that we're talking about achievements. Now, when we talk about achievement, I can't help but thank our collaborators. Next slide, please. Really can't help but thank our collaborators for their time, their trust, their teammateship, and my own EAC team, for their support and friendship, and particularly the WAC forerunners for their EAC examples, advice, and compliments. We feel very indebted. Thank you very much.
Well, Thank you, Joes and Julia and Terry, for your provocative presentations. While our attenders are formulating questions they might want to put to you, let me ask one of both Julia and Joe's concerning the in danger part that you referred to, Julia, and the fact that funding can always go away. Is the community of practice funding present still? And when will you know that it's renewed or will continue?
Thanks, Marty. The government seed grant for the community of practice only went from 2013 to 2015, I think, 2016. And then it is up to the individual universities to decide whether they will go on with community of practice or not. In Hong Kong, every triennium, the government gives a large pot of grant funding to each university. And they specify that this money must be spent on teaching development, including language enhancement type of development. But then it is up to the individual universities to decide how to use that money. So in my university, we have decided to continue COP. Communities of practice. But what my university has also decided is communities of practice should not need a lot of funding. So they have continued with the practice of only giving very small funds to each community of practice. So if we want to, for example, recruit project staff, full-time project staff, for example, then a community of practice fund in my university would not be enough. Then we have to go and look for other funds available, maybe directly from the government. So in the past few years, what I've done was to bid for competitive, large, huge funds. And in order to bid for those huge funds, I asked, for example, Joe's and colleagues from 3 other universities to join hands together to go for the large grants. Because in order to go for the large grants, we need a bigger team. And we need to show the government that whatever we are doing has currency and has buy-in from more than one university in Hong Kong.
Well, we're all going to keep fingers crossed that funding continues and that your institution decides to continue internally the way that you have, because certainly what you've done so far appears to be very successful.
Thank you. Yeah, so we hope that they will treasure that as well. They will value that, and they will allow us to continue.
Well, just personal experience. I know that when Terry and I have visited both of your universities, the enthusiasm for your work is palpable. The excitement that we see on your campuses is very, very noticeable. It can't be missed. Terry, you had a comment that you wanted to make.
Yes, I just wanted to say that Julia, the background that for Julia is Hong Kong Polytech, which many of us in the US know from the news. And just, I'm sorry we don't have a picture of your background, because yours is a beautiful institution wrapping around the mountains.
Yes. Well, next time. Yeah.
So Marty, do we want to just have folks ask questions and no need for chat? We're a small group here.
I see we don't have any questions in the chat box now. So I would like to invite people to unmute them. Everybody unmute. Who is there? Can our Grace, can you do that for us?
Yeah, I think Thomas has put up his hand. Thomas?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi all.
Okay.
Thank you for this presentation. It was really very interesting. I kind of have sort of a half-baked question that it's something that I think I've been trying to work through. And one of the reasons why I wanted to come and listen to your presentation today, kind of has to do with all the different frameworks that I think you explored and have been drawing on as you've been doing your program work. WAC, obviously, EAC, obviously, but some EAP and academic literacies type work. And so I guess one thing I've been trying to think through is the sort of the affordances of a focus on writing versus language and sort of some of the other things that these initiatives or these scholarly bases allow us. So I'm wondering what sorts of reflections you have and insights you might offer as you've cycled through those and landed on this EAC model. What can we in an American context or in other contexts really take from that and help us to think through our own work?
Jose, if you don't mind, I'll go first.
Okay.
Terry, Marty, okay?
Yes.
Yeah, we do struggle in thinking of deciding what kind of framework to use or what to focus on, for example, because our students, some of them come in with like a bare pass, as I said, in the secondary school exit exam, but some can get pretty high scores. And it's very difficult. I mean, we would actually like to, like Grace and I would like to be able to focus on literacy skills, right? And not just on proficiency, on, not on sentence level grammar, for example, right? We would really want to be able to focus on literacy skills. And for example, this year, when we work with students on final year projects, on capstone projects, we want to talk to them about research mapping and how to use language to show that you have those research mapping skills. But it has proven to be very difficult when we see that every other word that many of our students write, every other word is wrong, for example, in terms of the choice of grammar or vocabulary, and so wrong that their writing actually impedes understanding, right? Then we have this conflict. We cannot really just say, okay, we want to do academic literacy, so we will do it whatever, whether you're ready for it or not. We need to do something that would suit our students as well. So there is this conflict, this pulling us in both directions. And when I talked to other colleagues that came to the EAC conferences, especially colleagues from some of the East Asia and South Asia countries, I realized that they experience the same conflicts, the same problems that we do. I think Jose's university admits students of a higher English standard than my university. So it may be a bit different in Jose's university. Jose?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think, it's important to recognize the local setting, like what Terry, in her beginning speech, explained that WAC, is localized. And I think the same, with EAC, local and contextual, I think. So you need to know the profile of your students. And then because the profiling of the students, there will not, it will not be representative of a particular program. In other words, you need to know the program of a particular, the profile of students within a particular program in order to help them. Am I making sense to you? And therefore, that in my presentation, I mentioned that at CUHK, we use a flexible and evolving model. Now, if you ask me this question when I first started off, I said, I'm really sorry, I don't have a fixed model. I keep telling, colleagues and even my own colleagues, I said, look, I don't think we should have a fixed model, but we should have some theory, underlying theory, helping us understand, what is happening. Because, I'm from an applied linguistics background, so it's governed by more second language acquisition and applied linguistics, theory, genre-based approach, particularly, if we have to help students with a particular genre. So, being flexible and open for changes is something that I learned through experience. That leads me to some kind of success. Because if we have a fixed model that you must fit in to what I can offer, then the collaborators will say that no, this is not what we want. And then at the same time, I think the society is moving very fast, and so is education. And even mode of delivery, mode of learning, mode of thinking, and the cognitive style differ very, very, significantly, and they change so fast. So even though for courses, I would encourage my colleagues to say, well, don't think that, you have a course is going to settle now after 2 years. I said, no, students, change, the expectation change. So I'm being long-winded here, but I guess, what I wanted to say is that, we have to be flexible. And then while you have your own standard, what is governing, what the governing theories behind is, and that is important. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Thomas.
Do we have anyone else who would like to put forward a question?
I could ask another one.
Go ahead, Thomas. We know you've got your work cut out for you at your place, so go ahead.
I was thinking of two things actually. Terry, you mentioned the Haldane concepts of context of culture and situation, which I'm happy to see because I find those very compelling. And Josie, you were just kind of mentioning like students changing all the time, and a lot of that is also impacted by the context of culture. Like what sorts of policies are impacting the ways in which language is really used and taken up. So I'm kind of curious as you project out sort of the way in which language sort of in Hong Kong and more sort of on a larger scale within China, how do you project out that language? And thinking back to your question, Joseph, about why English as opposed to instruction in other ways. I don't know if that makes sense as much, but just kind of thinking about the sustainability of the efforts in terms of language policy.
Well, for me, as director of the unit, the English language T unit, I have to care about the English proficiency, right? The English language enhancement initiatives. Now, because, our university prides itself, in this, bilingual language policy, they really wanted all our graduates, to be well-versed in both languages. But look, I mean, that is, an ideal situation. And within the ESL setting, EFL setting, the student's preference for their mother tongue is understandable, right? But then, our university, the seniors, and then maybe even the potential employers, they would like our graduates to be proficient in all languages, sometimes not only two, maybe, some other foreign languages as well. So, well, that left us, with no choice, but to help them. But it's good that, at least our university, even though, it's called the Chinese University of Hong Kong, we understand very well the importance of English as an international language. And actually, if you have a chance to dig into some of our history, that, we have to fight with students. Some student bodies, were dead against, the emphasizing English. At our university is that, well, this is Chinese university, so on and so forth. Let's not go into that. But then, as I said, we have no choice, and we just, have to help our students. And at the same time, maybe this is something personal. To me, English is not just a tool. It's like a window, opening students' mind, to the world and to many other possibilities. And I'm so glad that our university is paying, this kind of attention to our students. English, not just Chinese. And I think, we're giving them a very good competitive edge, to survive well in this society. Yeah. So when you ask me, why English? And I think because it's like a lingua franca, very often you don't have a choice, right? Am I right, Julia?
Yeah.
By the time your students graduate and leave you, are they by and large happy with the curriculum that you have offered them in English?
Well, this is the big question. I don't want to brag about this, but I think, the situation is improving because students know that they need English, but they don't necessarily enjoy English. Yeah. And
That's not
I make a
unusual.
distinction between needs and wants.
Yeah.
But I think in a recent, exit surveys, I think, they believe that the university has provided them with, good support, in English. Yeah, that is, based on some survey, which is good. Yeah.
Let me just take the very last moment that we have to thank our speakers, Terry and Jose and Julia, for offering us wonderful ideas that we all need to think about and to be aware of. And Terry and I would enjoy seeing any of our colleagues in Hong Kong at the next conference, which we hope will be in a couple of years.
Definitely.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Marty.
So if any of you are interested in knowing more about EAC and the peer tutoring, at my university, please feel free to contact me. Yeah, and if you're interested in PolyU situation, contact Julia. Yeah.
Definitely. Yes.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you, Marty.
Bye-bye.